in Sodus.
More than one person shot.
Person shot the girl in the car.
We didn't know if we were safe.
Who would shoot Josh and Amber?
If it wasn't for this video, none of this would have ever happened.
They told me that he had a ballistic vest.
We are throwing you your only lifeline. Come clean.
Who just shoots a mother in the head?
How could you be so evil? I love this picture of Josh. He thought he was Mr. Strongman. Josh was my son. He was very headstrong. One of his favorite phrases was, "Am I right or am I wrong?" And we all would just shake our head and say, "You're right, Josh." He was a proud dad. He had Gabby and Bentley from a prior relationship. And then a couple years later, Josh met Amber, and he told me that Amber was so different than anybody he had ever dated. And she loved Gabby and Bentley. She treated them like her own kids.
Amber is my little baby sister. Amber was a sweetheart. She always was a sweetheart. We grew up in Sodus, New York, upstate New York. Amber met Josh through a mutual friend, and they really kind of hit things off. Josh would come to family gatherings and, you know, he would bring his children. Amber was always a mother figure to all of the children.
A while after Josh and Amber met, probably a year or so, they had Josh Jr.
Joshua Jr., he was just the light of their lives. It just was so cute to watch my little baby sister having a baby of her own and just nurturing this little boy. He had autism, and she was a fierce mama bear.
I don't believe it at all. I need.
This one, Amber, little Josh. She just loved him.
So Amber and Josh at that point had Gabby and Bentley and Joshua Jr. all living together in a house that Amber and Josh had recently purchased. They were making it a home for their growing family.
This one is the kids' first day of school in Sodus. A lot of memories.
I was completing an eviction for the Sheriff's Department on Carlton Street in the town of Sodus. I heard some loud bangs. Moments later, I was dispatched to gunshots in the area south of me. And as I approached, I could see that there was a victim partially underneath a pickup truck. He was deceased. I had never walked in on a crime scene like that before. There was a vehicle in a driveway across the street from the incident address. So they approached the car. There was a female victim slumped across the center console in the driver's seat. The female was deceased with a gunshot wound to the head. And as I rounded the car, I could see that there was a child in the back seat. The child was Josh Niles Jr. I thought he was in shock. I know I was probably in shock, so I would say this is the worst one I'd seen.
This crime was absolutely shocking. The town of Sodus rarely has a murder, so for a double homicide to happen here in broad daylight, it was so unusual.
We took care of Josh Jr. And get him in a safe place
with some neighbors and another responding deputy. It wasn't very hard to identify our victims. They both had ID next to their bodies. They were Josh Niles and Amber Washburn. The evidence that's on scene is shell casings. And judging by the rounds that were all over the ground, it was a semi-automatic 9mm handgun that had been used. Eyewitnesses told us that Josh had been outside talking with somebody in his driveway. And right about the same time that Amber had pulled into the driveway, coming home with her son, Josh Jr., that individual talking with Josh pulled out a gun, shot him in the chest. Amber had seen what was happening, put her car in reverse, tried to get out of there, and that person turned and shot her in the head. Josh saw it happen, and the last few seconds of his life, he was calling out for Amber. We treated this as if someone was loose in the public.
There are police investigating the Wayne County Sheriff's Office along with state police. Residents here in the area are being told to shelter in place.
We had notified our public schools to close, to at least lock down. We had air searches, we had ground searches.
Boom, boom, boom. Shot the girl in the car.
Police helicopter up there still searching for what they're calling an unknown perpetrator.
I started hearing news of a shooting that was in Sodus. And I had a voicemail from my dad. I don't know why I kept it, but I have it on my phone still.
Angie, please call us, okay? I've got some really rough news.
And that was it. Those few words, and I knew.
I called Josh and he didn't answer his phone. I'm not feeling good about this. Got a call and it was a private number and I just knew it wasn't good. And it was one of the police officers. And she said, there's been a shooting and involved Josh. And I said, yeah. And I said, she goes, and he didn't make it. And I just started screaming, no, not my Josh. That's all I could say. Not my Josh. And I said, where's Amber? She said, she didn't make it either. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I couldn't even imagine who would shoot Josh and Amber.
There is absolute panic in this town. The manhunt is on, the helicopters are circling overhead, and back at the crime scene, one of the K-9 teams hits on something.
K-9s located a piece of clothing that was on the next street over, behind Josh's house. So we collected it in hopes that at some point we might be able to find a DNA match in it. It's what SWAT members would call a balaclava. It's a ski mask. To us, it seemed out of place. Besides the shell casings that we picked up at the scene, the balaclava was the only piece of evidence. And while that was a win, I mean, it was a little defeating knowing it was going to take us quite a bit of time in order to get any sort of an answer as to if there was DNA involved.
This seemed like a random execution of a young couple in front of their child. And the killer was still out there.
We were all worried because we had no clue who it was that did this.
We didn't know if we were safe.
someone shot and killed a young SOTUS couple, and no one's been arrested.
Investigators say the shooter intentionally targeted 28-year-old Joshua Niles and 24-year-old Amber Washburn, but they did not say why.
Despite the intense manhunt, the killer is not found. And as the investigation starts to really ramp up, the families, well, they're left dealing with the reality of what's happened.
Joshua Jr. was still in the car when my sister was shot. But Gabby and Bentley were actually at the local school when this happened, and it was literally just down the street. So, you know, now you've got essentially 3 children that are orphaned in New York. In the days after Amber and Josh were murdered, we just kind of all had to come together as a family. And my parents stepped up and took Joshua Jr. at that point.
I think everybody was just in so much shock that we really didn't know what to do. We had a vigil at Josh and Amber's house.
Josh and Amber had a lot of friends. They had a lot of family. I should say Josh had a big family. And they were all incredibly supportive, and they all rallied together.
The community of SOTUS and the kids of school teachers and family and friends were all there. Our TV station came out. And Gabby and Bentley's mom, Charlene, was there, up from Texas. She's Josh's ex-girlfriend.
Whoever did it has now made it to where my kids grow up that day. And that's nothing a kid should ever have to do. The most I have to say to y'all is justice needs to be served.
Charlene had moved to Texas. And Josh allowed her to take the children, split custody. Josh would have to go to Texas to pick them up, and he would have them in the summers and every other Christmas. Charlene was part of our family because of the children. The vigil was very nice, but we still had no idea what was going on and who it was.
Who does that? Who just shoots a mother in the head?
We had a very specific description of the shooter being a white male in a black hoodie and jeans. We were, at this point, pulling camera footage from local businesses, from people's Ring doorbells.
Whoever wanted Josh killed seemed very angry with the amount of bullets that they fired at him. That was a crime of a personal nature.
Investigators wanted to figure out if anyone had a beef with either Josh or Amber, so they started to look into the backgrounds of people who were connected to them.
We learned that Josh and Charlene had a pretty rocky history. Their relationship was very turbulent.
Both of them had complaints against each other for domestic violence, for fighting.
We believe that we still have some more to dig into, and family, of course, certainly is the best source of information.
Josh and Charlene were never married. They dated for a few years. She ended up moving in our house. She lived with us for quite a while. She ended up getting pregnant with Gabriella. And then a couple years later, she got pregnant for Bentley. And they had gotten their own trailer. Things were rough because she was very opinionated and Josh was very opinionated, and she loved to instigate Josh. So it wasn't a really great relationship. He finally realized enough was enough, and that was when the relationship was done. She wanted to move to Texas, and it would be the best for them both to get her as far away from him as possible. And Charlene had the kids.
We, at that time, started to learn more about Charlene and her relationships down in Texas. Charlene married a police officer by the name of Timothy Dean.
Investigators learned that Tim Dean had a daughter from a prior relationship and that he and Charlene had joint custody of that child, as well as Charlene's children. And so it really looked like a portrait of a modern blended family.
One of our detectives had the insight to take Josh's name and run it down through our family courts. And it turned out he had just been granted custody of his 2 kids. And those 2 kids had come up from Texas.
This really rang the alarm bells for the investigators in upstate New York. What could possibly have happened in Texas that would have caused Charlene to lose custody of her 2 children with Josh?
We started having communications with the Texas Rangers, and they were very, very familiar with Tim Dean.
Sunray was just a 3-man department. It's been that way for a lot of years. And Tim Dean was police chief. In May 2018, the Texas Ranger for our area, he received information about Tim Dean, and it was given to him, I believe, by Christina.
My name is Christina Dean, and I am Tim Dean's ex-wife. I was married to Tim Dean from October of 2010 till July of 2017. We share a daughter together, Madison, after our divorce. Tim and I had joint custody of Madison. I found out about Charlene fairly quickly after our divorce. Tim had posted on his Instagram this picture that they got engaged. It was the first person that you dated after we got divorced. And now all of a sudden you're getting married to that person. Like, that's a little fast. But to each their own, like, by all means. There were issues fairly early on with Madison and Charlene. Charlene was venting about the fact that all Madison does is cry. She is just this awful, horrible 2-year-old, and that she feels like, you know, marrying Tim was a bad decision because of Madison. And venting about a 2-year-old child that's not yours, that's not okay. I had gotten a phone call from the Texas Rangers saying that Madison was involved in a child assault case and that she was in CPS custody. They just told me that there was a video posted on Facebook.
I have a video here. When is the last time you've seen it?
It's been a while.
I don't know if you would be open to commenting on it.
Yeah. There was a video of Tim assaulting Madison. Charlene had sent it to some of her friends on Facebook. In the video, she wouldn't eat her dinner. She was sitting at the kitchen table. Tim started yelling and screaming at her.
Grab your fork and shut the up!
She's scared. She's terrified. You have a grown-ass man in your face screaming at you, and you are 2 years old.
I don't want to hear any huffing and puffing. I want to hear yes, sir.
And then he slapped her across the face. Yeah, that's always hard to watch. I'm still just as pissed off now as I was back then, because that's my daughter. And I will go to the ends of the earth to protect my kids. And there's no excuse for Charlene to sit there and record a video when you very blatantly take your daughter out of the crossfire. But you let mine sit there? If I see a kid in danger, I'm definitely stepping in and intervening.
Charlene forwarded that video to a couple of her friends. Those friends turned Tim Dean in. There was a task force in Texas who actually investigated that crime.
We saw the video, and Tim Dean was arrested in his driveway. He was basically put on administrative leave, but eventually he was fired.
This was a big deal in Sunray, Texas. Firing a police chief for child abuse? That is a big deal anywhere, but in a town of just 1,000 people, that's something everybody knows about.
Tim, he bonded out on the charge, which allowed him to do what he normally would do until the time that they had the hearing. So it could be a year, it could be 2 years before he would have to appear in court.
Charlene did not mention to us what had happened. Amber did some investigating, and she had found an article on the internet saying that Tim had been arrested for abusing his child. And that's how we found out what was going on.
Not only did Tim lose his job, but Charlene, by staying with Tim, lost custody of her children. Josh was able to seek immediate custody and was granted that custody here in Wayne County.
Charlene, I know she blamed the Texas Ranger here, Child Protective Services here. She blamed the district attorney here. She'd been blaming a lot of people at that point.
These are all messages from Charlene when Charlene lost custody of her kids. And she essentially blamed me. She has no problem throwing out some pretty nasty words. This one says, "You stupid ass, you ruined my damn life. You deserve the worst life imaginable. Karma is a bitch. You with a wrong woman." Those are really hard because there's no accountability. You sat there and watched a 2-year-old child get slapped and did nothing about it. But I'm the one that ruined your life. Like, take some accountability for what you did.
The more we started to talk with the Texas authorities, and the more we started to talk about the life of Tim, Charlene, and Josh, and how they all related, we believed at that point we were heading down the right track.
Someone had contacted me and said, "Hey, there's been a double murder up in Sodus, New York." And he said, "Yeah, the ex-husband of Charlene had been killed along with his wife." I asked him, I said, "Do we know where Charlie was at?"
We knew that Charlene was not in the state of New York at the time of the crime. She was down there in Texas, but we had no idea where Tim Dean had been.
We wanted to find Tim Dean.
Police believe that a former Texas cop named Tim Dean could be behind a brazen double murder in upstate New York.
We got a hold of Tim Dean's phone records. 2 days before the crimes occurred, Tim Dean had an accident in the state of Kansas with a rental vehicle. He had called 911 to report that he had driven off the road into a culvert and damaged the vehicle. So we were able to talk with the Kansas cop that responded to that incident, and that was Deputy Corey Nicolette.
I was a patrol deputy with the Lyon County, Kansas Sheriff's Office, and about 4 in the morning on October 20th, the call comes out that there's a vehicle on K-130. I pulled up and got out of the vehicle. It was a small wreck in a ditch.
What happened? Slid off of the It's a damn rental car. Okay, jump in the front passenger seat.
I got his Texas driver's license. I saw that his name was Timothy Dean. And we had the whole conversation.
Where were you going? Honestly, man, I was just driving. My whole life has kind of gone to lately. More or less living out of my car.
But you had money to get a rental?
I noticed a couple things right off the bat. The first was that the rental agreement wasn't in his name.
Who's Bowler Brown?
He's a buddy of mine.
So he rented the car for you?
Yeah.
He didn't want to take your car?
My car, the starter's acting up on it.
It's weird to me that you would be driving around. You don't really have a plan. You're just kind of out here winging it, saying you're living out of your car.
So this is the insurance for your vehicle. And you have a 2016 with starter issues already?
That's my wife's car.
So where's your wife?
She's at home.
I thought you said you didn't have a home.
Well, we have a pending divorce and,
Pending divorce, huh? Is that why you're out driving around instead of at home? That bad, huh?
yeah, like I said, it's all gone to
I am a bit of a conversationalist, and typically it may lead to a little thing here or there in a case, or enough to move a case on.
So where are you gonna go?
Well, I've got a family friend that I was gonna go see, but
422.
Where's that at?
that's all the way up in New York.
At the time, him saying New York was not a red flag doesn't mean anything, but another piece of the puzzle of something here just doesn't fit correctly. The tow truck came out, loaded up the vehicle, and they actually took Timothy Dean back to Emporia, Kansas, and that was, I thought, the end of it. I was very surprised to get a phone call a few days later. Timothy Dean was a prime suspect in a double homicide in New York.
We know the names of the victims. They are Amber Washburn, who was 24 years old, and Josh Niles, who was 28.
My initial thought was he had the wrong case. My case wasn't a double homicide. It was this, small wreck in a ditch. And he asked me, he said, did the driver say where he was going to go? And I said, yeah, he said something about going to New York. Immediately, everything changed.
We had asked Deputy Nicolette if he could help us out with a few things, a little follow-up. He was able to track down where Tim had been towed to.
K&S Towing in Emporia, Kansas. They told me that he had a ballistic vest. He was carrying this heavy tote filled with loaded rifle magazines. I never saw this tote because it was in the back and had stuff over the top of it. So that was one of those things I didn't know about was even in there, but I think Timothy Dean had bigger plans when he and I encountered each other than he was letting on.
Tim had rented another vehicle to continue his journey. And we find out through investigation that the person that helped him rent that vehicle was Charlene Childers. We now had evidence that Tim Dean was headed towards New York. And that was just a couple days before the homicides. Charlene Childers made sure that happened. Now, I want to go to Texas. We met with Texas DPS, the Rangers, the FBI, and there was a whole slew of people that were ready there waiting for us. We knew that Charlene was in the state of New York.
But our big thing was Tim. We did the surveillance on his houses. We finally found him in Sunray.
However, we didn't quite have everything lined up. We wanted the opportunity to interview both of these individuals, see if they would potentially give statements either incriminating themselves or the others involved in the situation.
We knew that Tim was armed and dangerous. We didn't know where his mindset was. I had been a member of the SWAT team for years up here in Wayne County. And I gotta tell you, they do it right in Texas. When they hit a house, the whole neighborhood knows it. I mean, they had helicopters, they had drones, they had more than enough manpower, they had tear gas, they had explosive breaching.
It takes him a good 5 minutes before he actually walks out that door. And Tim was arrested.
At the same time that this warrant was being executed on Tim Dean's residence, a group of officers up here in Wayne County picked up Charlene.
So now police have their two suspects. They've got Tim Dean down in Texas, and they've got Charlene Childers up in New York, who seem to know what Tim was up to. In Texas, they were questioning one of their own, a former police chief. Would they even be able to get him to talk?
We are throwing you your only lifeline, and that's to come clean. We are trying to understand why you did it. Are you a cold-blooded killer and a coward? Or were you going through a hard time and were depressed and not in your right mind and manipulated by a very oppressive, manipulating woman and did something to try to keep that marriage together because you screwed it up for her? I mean, it's one of the two. Help us understand why.
He was interviewed, didn't provide anything, didn't give them anything.
What made you go up there and do that, man?
I didn't do it.
The one thing he hasn't learned in law enforcement is if you do something you're not supposed to, you keep your mouth shut. You don't say nothing. He did do that.
I already told you I won't mind her.
Okay.
So now they turn their attention to Charlene Childers, who's under arrest up in upstate New York.
I'm going to make myself some coffee. Would you like a cup of coffee?
I'll take coffee.
Do you like anything in it?
Cream and sugar.
Charlene likes to flirt and believes that she can get her way and manipulate people with that flirtation.
You want to smile?
I do.
Okay. Yeah, so there's nothing wrong with that, okay? Hey, I'm a beautiful guy and I know I got that powers too. So I'm with you on that, okay?
You have a beautiful
Okay,
beard.
there, thank you.
She thought she was using her charisma to try to make these officers believe that she had absolutely nothing to do with the death of her children's father. But the detectives that Charlene were talking to, very seasoned.
At this point, Charlene knows that she can point the finger at her husband.
Tim was always devoted to me. He's like, oh, she'll work it out. We'll work it out. We'll make it work. Dude, it's not gonna work. I'm sorry to bust your bubble, but it ain't gonna work.
And at this point, she can also ask for a lawyer at any time and remain silent. But she just can't help herself.
You know, I told him that, you know, I just want him to die.
While Charlene was in the custody of the Wayne County Sheriffs, she tried to distance herself from the actual homicide and place it squarely on Timothy Dean's shoulders. But she did admit to the frustration of not having custody of her children.
I'm a damn good mom. I'm torn.
Why do you think that happened?
I lost my kids because my kids didn't feel safe around Tim.
Okay. Do you think if you had gotten custody back of the kids that maybe things would have worked out differently with your marriage?
If I ever get custody back, then we'll do the whole, slowly. Date for a little bit, bring you back into the kids' lives slowly, reintroduce kind of thing.
Makes sense.
Make them, see that you're not such a bad guy that everybody's made you out to be,
Charlene didn't want her ex, Josh Niles, to have custody of her kids. Well, that was an important clue for the police, right?
Every time I turn around, that man's trying to do something to my life. Doesn't matter that I live halfway across the country, but no. Me and Ted talked about it. Okay? Shoot him. Just shoot him. Did I actually mean it? No. I told him that, I just want him to die. I'm tired of it. I'm not sure that I exactly said shooting him,
Okay.
just that he died.
Okay.
Just die.
Gotcha.
I'm done. I'm over it.
How specific did you get into the talk about him shooting Josh?
We didn't get specific. It was just shoot him, get him out of my life,
And he is crazy in love with you enough that you gotta believe it. I mean, if you said that to him, from what you're telling me, that he may actually carry that out.
They were able to get her to actually tell the truth in the end.
You knew he was going to shoot him. You knew that was his plan to go up to New York.
I knew it was a plan, but I didn't.
I'm asking you, do you think you're responsible a little bit?
I feel like I had.
After a couple hours, she finally admitted to us that she was the one that ordered Josh Niles' death.
For law enforcement, this was enough to charge both Tim and Charlene.
The Wayne County Sheriff has charged Timothy Dean and Charlene Childers in the case, saying Dean pulled the trigger.
When Charlene and Timothy Dean had murder charges finally brought against them, there was a sense of relief, but also disbelief. Who wants their children's father to be murdered just because you think you deserve custody of them?
It really hurt me that Charlene was involved, only because she was part of our family because of the children, and she lived with us for years. And to think that she would do something so evil really hurt me inside.
We charged Charlene and Tim with murder in the first degree. The case was very strong against Timothy Dean.
The balaclava that was discovered behind the home comes back with the DNA as a match for Tim Dean.
We conducted a jury trial exclusively against Timothy Dean. We were able to link up what happened in Texas, the travel to Kansas, and then ultimately the homicide in New York. Charlene Childers testified against Timothy Dean, went into the plan to have Josh Niles killed. Everyone conceded that Amber Washburn was never the target. She was an unintended victim. There was an overwhelming amount of evidence in this case, but you never know until they come back.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
And ultimately, Charlene Childers pled guilty to an account of manslaughter in the first degree with a sentence of 28 years in the Department of Corrections.
When I look at her going to the vigil, it makes me sick to my stomach. You sat with Josh and Amber's families, knowing the whole time that you planned this out. How could you be so evil?
When Tim and Charlene had gotten serious, his whole personality changed. He took a turn, and if it wasn't for this video, none of this would have ever happened.
Charlene Childers has just ruined so many people's lives, complete families, torn apart from her deciding that Josh had to die. Currently, my parents are the legal guardians of Joshua Jr. If I could talk to Amber now, I would just tell her that her little boy is amazing and he's doing so well, and that we all love her so much and that we miss her.
Right now, Gabriella and Bentley are with our daughter, Amanda. They remember their dad, and they remember Amber. They adored Amber. I know Josh is always with me. I have a necklace. This has Josh's ashes in it. And this has both Josh and Amber's ashes infused into the glass. So they will always be together, like they always wanted to be.